Good morning, Jorge.
Good morning, Michael.
It's good to be with you again to help the world solve its problems. Today we're going to discuss the aftermath of the horrific event in Syria, vis-a-vis the use of sarin gas by the dictator Assad against his own people, and what we think should be done by the world at large. If not the world at large, then let's boil it down to the West, the civilized world, the so-called Judeo-Christian civilization that exists in our world. What should that segment of humanity do in cases like this? And the case like this is similar to what happened on a much larger scale in Rwanda, and what happened on an even larger scale in Cambodia, and is probably going to happen again and again unless humanity gets its act together in some way and does something. I have my own ideas about it, but I will pass the ball to you for the moment.
Okay. Yes. For me, when thinking on the subject, and especially after it happened, seeing it on the news, there is a few different angles that I try and look at all the situations. A few different, like, the one is what happened and how we're reacting to it, just in the sense of, like, okay, do we have the right information about that this really happened, this gas, the attack, who did it? Because in all this, the more information you have, the better response as a group of countries we can have. Because even in that is, they say there might be involvement from Russia. So we need to know this kind of things, because we can't ask the Russians to help us stop something like that when they might be helping or benefiting from it. So on one part, getting the information of what happened in a timely manner, and really getting the right people to analyze it. I think that's something that needs to be in place so that we can have a reaction. After that, the other part of it is realizing what are the reasons why we as a group of countries, or the West or whichever, are reacting to that specific place. This is more do we have a side interest that we have in said country? Is there oil? Is there minerals? Is there something that we may need to be honest about when reacting to something? Because not reacting to famine in Somalia, where millions are dying, we're doing that fine right now. Like, right? Like, so if we go, like, how do we analyze why we are reacting? That's a tough part. I don't know if it has to be with like how sad, or like how we get to saying, oh, this one really crossed the line against something else that we're being inactive about. I'll stop there just to see what your, like, just my initial, like, this is the beginning of it. When we first see it.
I think this is a tangent to the discussion that I'm going to create right now, but I think it points to a divide between your generation, the millennials, and mine, the boomers, when you begin a discussion like this by asking, well, what really happened? I think to the average boomer, it is perfectly obvious what happened and who was responsible. But you have been brought up in an age where the dissemination of the news has been the responsibility of so many different outlets.
The information age.
Information age you are a child of that. And therefore, everything comes into question for you, because there are so many sources of information, or so-called information, that mislead you, potentially. But we're off on a tangent here.
Yeah.
It's perfectly obvious to me that the Syrian dictator gassed his own people, And it's very likely that the Russians knew about it. Now, what is the solution? What should the civilized world do? I can't help but be reminded of it's now 2 years since the 200 Nigerian schoolgirls were abducted.
Yes.
Let's try to imagine for a moment what would happen if one schoolgirl, were abducted in Syracuse, New York, or in Kingston, Ontario. The local police would get involved. In the United States, the FBI would get involved. In Canada, the RCMP would get involved. There would be much more than an Amber Alert. There would be a full court press to find this girl and punish the perpetrator. Now try to imagine in our society if somehow 200 schoolgirls were abducted in Syracuse, New York, or in Kingston, Ontario. What would happen in our society? Try to imagine that for a moment. A full society response would ensure that these girls would be either rescued or their abductors killed, one way or another. Now, those Nigerian schoolgirls, there was no response possible by the Nigerian government. And I think that the entire civilized world is drenched in disgrace because there's no mechanism on the part of humanity, on the part of our species, to rescue those girls and punish the perpetrators.
But that's I'm sorry, I have to call it out. It's hypocritical because the numbers are crazy. Thousands of kids die every day because they can't get to clean water. Things like that. So it's like, okay, so 200 girls getting abducted is very sad and we should react. But at the other end, we could correct this thing that is killing thousands a day, but we don't. And it is for me to bring in the discussion, we need to know when, okay, we get sad about this, but child labor, that's okay. Oh, but 200 kids getting abducted, that's really bad because I would hate it to happen to my kid. And this part is a reality. It's the pictures. It's what happens. Like there's a lot of unfairness. A lot of bad things happen day in, day out. Sometimes not even that far away. Yet we're so worried about something that happens thousands of kilometers. If I were to be able to have a utopia, we would be concerned about both things and try and do our best on both things. I'm not saying that we should ignore what happened in Syria. Yeah, we should react to it. But also, this issue with Assad is not new. It's not because he did this gas thing that we should have reacted and figured out a way to do something. I think the issue a lot of the times is, well, politics and power. If everyone's fighting those, China has its reasons to veto this action by the West, and then the US has its reasons to veto someone else's actions because they all want to stay in power, keep power, and at the end of the day, they care for themselves, right? The individual, this whole idea of the West being united, that happens after they make sure that they're okay, right? Each country has to make sure that they're okay before they go. No one's going to go to Syria if they have to deal with something else on their own.
Your remarks reminded me of I think it was a book of poetry by Leonard Cohen called Let Us Compare Mythologies, which made me think, while listening to your remarks about, yes, people are dying from hunger in Somalia, let us compare atrocities. At the moment, we're talking about atrocities committed in a military sense.
Right.
And I want to further my thinking on this and my analogy to the kidnapping of the Nigerian schoolgirls. There should be, in the world, on the part of Western civilization, the equivalent of an international police force. It would have taken 1 or 2 regiments of well-trained Western soldiers, well-equipped, to stop the Rwandan massacre. The equivalent force could probably go into Nigeria and destroy Boko Haram.
Right.
That force does not exist. It does not exist because of the nature of the United Nations. To extend my thinking, if I may, the United Nations is a defective organization because it is not made up entirely of free democratic countries. It has, for example, Russia and China, both of which have vetoes over the Security Council. Russia just vetoed a resolution of the Security Council yesterday asking for an investigation of the gas attack in Syria. How could such an organization move forward? Not to speak of creating an international police force.
But at that point, Russia can turn around and do the same thing against the U.S. for a lot of things that the U.S. has done, going into Iraq for no good reason. That's called an invasion. Within the UN, you would have to boot the U.S. out of the UN for invading another country that way. But we go, nah, that's life, buddy. That's life. You know what I mean? There's this part of it where we have this like, well, damn it, we have a problem. We, the West, are not as innocent as and righteous as we might want to be. Like that's an issue. Yeah, I can complain about Russia. They're horrible. So many bad things. China too. But then it's like I live in a country. I've had to live with this. This might be a tangent, but this duality of being born in Argentina and then now having Canadian citizenship for 5-6 years now, probably more, and I'm forgetting. But that we have issues like in Canada. We think we're so nice. It's like we have a good government. But this government would allow mines in Argentina to destroy, to create all sorts of havoc and pollute people's waters. And I have this issue of like, oh, damn it, I'm proud to be Canadian, but it's not perfect. You know, and there's this part of, well, then how do we deal with that? How do you turn around and say, well, the U.S. mostly does good? Don't look at the history with Latin America and puppet governments, but mostly we're better than. So how do you deal with that part? Like, who do you choose to be in this police force, and how do they get a sit at the table?
It's certainly true that you undercut my ideal projections by bringing in reality, usually in our discussion. I'm trying to envision a world in which the United States would never have had to invade Iraq because the international police force of which I speak would have eliminated the Saddam Husseins of the world once they committed atrocities against their own people. Therefore, the United States would never have needed to get involved in Iraq.
Right. Well, but that's assuming that the reason why the U.S. got involved in Iraq was purely to stop Saddam Hussein.
If you could point to one drop of oil having been taken out of Iraq by the United States, I would be in your debt.
Sure. Though the poppy production for heroin has gone skyrocketing high as soon as the Americans came in.
In Afghanistan.
In Afghanistan, not in Iraq?
No, Afghanistan is the home of the
corrected.
poppy.
That was a funny one.
But the United States attempted to eradicate the poppy fields, and that's one of the reasons why the Taliban gained so much favor among the peasantry of Afghanistan. However, that's another tangent.
So to go back to the discussion, so let's imagine that we're able to have a UN which is properly policing, which is fair. That meaning there is no one above it in it. That meaning if the U.S. decides to meddle with an election in Venezuela, well, the U.S. will get properly reprimanded for it. The same way if Russia tries to do something, you know what I mean? Like,
I'm with you.
That could be. Let's go in this world that the Big Brother would let us do that, being the U.S. So for me, going like, okay, we can do this, I think we would benefit from looking at it as a charity. I don't know if you have read or listened to any subject on charity in Africa and what works, what doesn't work, and how you are able to achieve success charity-wise. There has been a lot of books and a lot of people coming out saying that the idea of just bringing in, free shoes to a village in Africa can be so detrimental to the society. That that there's this Toms. You can buy one pair and another pair get sent to a child in Africa. That was the idea. That is the idea. And they got scolded because no one thought that when they would do that, so they would have a shipment full of shoes, send them to this village, and then give them away for free. Problem is, the cobbler, the shoe salesman, the shoemaker lost their jobs because now there are free shoes in this place. So they had to look at, okay, so we need to figure out how we do charity. The whole idea of empowering the people who are there getting this charitable thing done, so they build the houses.
Teach them to fish instead of giving them the fish.
So I think it would be a great idea to take that towards fixing those things. In the same way that, when there's an emergency and people just need water, you know what? A shipment of water is what's needed. You don't need to teach someone how to make a well when there was just an earthquake. No, you need to give them just bottles of water. There's that kind of solution, if that makes sense. I mean, aid sometimes needs to be a quick fix solution. So I'm saying when it comes to war issues, sometimes you need a quick fix solution, which may be, taking someone out of power because they attack their own people with gas, that situation. But there's the other way of, okay, you can try and get a solution that is less aggressive, doesn't create a void, which, we have seen in history creates an ISIS, that whole idea. So that's for me, if we were able to get these people who decide how to do it.
Let me interject this. Far be it from me to praise Donald Trump for anything, because he is a repulsive human being who should not be in the office that he currently holds. But I have to say that he did the right thing vis-a-vis sending those Tomahawk missiles to that airfield. I wish that he had sent 500 more such Tomahawk missiles, and I wish that he had sent another 500 into the presidential palace in Damascus to decapitate the leadership of the Syrian government. However, that's a tangent. I think that to wrap up our discussion today, I think we both agree the human race, humanity as a whole, our species, does not have a political spine for the collectivity. There is no spine.
It's an individual.
We are lacking it, and we require it in order to deal with the atrocities that you mentioned, children starving to death in South Sudan and Somalia, just as much as the atrocities that I was focusing on, Rwanda, Cambodia, all the politically engendered atrocities. We need a central authority that is guided by reason and goodwill and compassion, and we do not have that.
It's true. We don't have it, and even whatever we kind of have is masked behind, there's a lot of different reasons for their actions, which is where we never know how people are making decisions, Trump, etc. We don't know exactly why everyone does what they do.
No doubt this is a theme that we will pick up on again.
Yep. It was great discussion.
Thank you.